Hi.
This doesn't have to happen. A little help in childhood makes a big difference to where life takes you. When I was a baby, the nurses noticed that my mum wasn't coping and helped her and explained how important my childhood is to the rest of my life. So, with a bit of help, she coped. The police came round after next door complained about the noise from Mum and Dad fighting. They asked how I was feeling. I told them I was scared all the time. Mum and Dad got help. The shouting got better and the hitting stopped. I even got some bedtime stories. I still had problems at school, but the teacher asked me about what was happening at home. I got help controlling my feelings. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough. I'm now married with 2 children, and I've got a job. Most of the time. I haven't repeated the same problems with my kids. We got help when being a parent got too much. Our children are ACE-free, and that means their kids have a good chance of growing up ACE-free as well.
Doctors say my life is full of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. But in my world, this means I see my dad hitting my mum. Dad's got a drinking problem, and mum's always crying, even with the tablets. I am always being shouted at and hit. After the booze and bags, there's not enough money for toys or clothes, or even food. I'm getting used to being scared all the time. Now I'm just angry. Doctors say things are changing inside me. My brain isn't learning how to control my feelings properly. My body can't relax like those kids who don't have ACEs, so my body won't be able to repair itself properly when I get older, making it more likely I'll get cancer or heart disease as an adult. It hurts when my parents hit me, but the real damage is hidden, and that damage will be with me for life. My parents don't understand. All the drinking and fighting means I'm scared. I'd like a cuddle, perhaps a bedtime story, but mostly I'd like them to stop shouting at me. And sometimes they hit me. Feeling scared every day and not feeling loved or wanted will change me for the rest of my life. Later, I'll have problems at school, problems with alcohol, and I'll get in trouble with the police. What's happening to me right now means I'm more likely to have serious health problems in middle age and die sooner than I should.
I drink and smoke. They say I'm out of control, but I'm not. It's just my way of coping with my ACEs. I've been in plenty of fights, but what's wrong with that? Kids' punches don't hurt half as much as when my dad hits me. I beat up a kid last week at school because he looked at me weird. Who cares? I ended up with more time out of school.
Good morning. I'm glad that you have joined in to this episode of Aces Matter Live. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Michael. I am the founder of ER for Traumatized Children. And on the second and the fourth Friday, I facilitate a 60-minute educational conversation about healing and preventing adverse childhood experiences, or AKA ACEs. I am a reacher and contributing show host for Aces Matter, Aces Matter Live. On the show, we interview live. On the show, we interview. I am a reacher and contributor on the show of Aces Matter Live. On the show, we interview live experienced survivors and subject matter experts on topics related to childhood adversities and adult mental health. Anyone that has experienced childhood could benefit from listening, but particularly those that have had a hard time with adulthood because of their childhoods. But before I go on, I've got to give you this disclaimer. As a reacher for Aces Matter, I use my social media platform to educate others about the generational effects of ACEs and the need for trauma resilience provision. As a reminder, this show is for educational purposes only, and some of the content may be triggering for some adults. Please consult a medical professional if you need immediate assistance. So, what are ACEs? You may be asking. ACEs are a form of childhood trauma recognized by mental health professionals worldwide. ACEs are not something we just come up with. ACEs is an acronym that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. ACEs are negative events that affects the development, mind, and bodies of children under 18. So not only do ACEs negatively impact children, but the negative effects such as physical and mental illnesses also cross over into adulthood. So you may be asking, what is ACEs Matter? Well, ACEs Matter is a charitable fundraising service for promoting research and education for those affected by childhood trauma and adversities. ACEs Matter is on a mission to have every home and community talking and doing something about adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. So now, since we got the business out of the way, our show topic today is about domestic violence. And I want to introduce but first, before I introduce our special guest, we have some stats. I looked at some stats about domestic violence. One of the stats says 70% of abusers also abuse their children. So in other words, 70% of the ones that's abusive in childhood and in the domestic violence in the relationship also abuses the children. Another statistic that we looked at was the prosecution rate is low. In 2018, 9,053 cases was reported, but only 235 cases was actually convicted. So it's very low. And today, we want to get more eyes on domestic violence, and hopefully in the near future that will go up.
So have you heard about these things called ACEs?
I mean, I think I heard of them, something about adverse childhood experiences. Why you ask me that?
Yeah, that is what ACEs stands for.
So now I'd like to introduce our special guest for today. She is my friend, my fellow reacher, co-host. She's my friend, my fellow reacher, and co-host. And she is a published author. And the name of her book is A Blessing in Disguise. She is a DV coach. And I know she will be telling more about that as she comes on. And her name is, help me welcome to the show, Reba.
Yeah. Hi, thank you.
Hello, Reba. How are you today?
I'm good. Can you hear me good?
I can hear you. I can hear you good. I hope everybody else can hear you out there, sir, because I know you got some important stuff you want to tell us today that you want to help people and help them through what you've been through. So, how your sales on your book going?
They're going great.
All right.
But it's just not about the book. The sales of the book is the lives that we're trying to change through the book. So that's the main part of the project. The main
Okay.
part of me writing the book.
Okay. But before we get into your interview, I've got to let everybody know that we have a special we have a expert that's listening in the studio, and she will be out shortly to give her expert opinion on the things that you're talking about today. So since we got all that out of the way, now we ready to hear your story. And I know you are real versed, and you can tell your story better than anyone. So we're just going to allow you to tell your story and inspire some people today. Tell us something about how you made it through it, how you came out of it, and what inspired you to write the book.
Well, first of all, my name is Reba Bell, like he said, and I have a book out called A Blessing in Disguise. And also, I was inspired to write this book only because during the pandemic, as many people knew and know, that they had to stay with their partners. A lot of people had to stay in the house with the people that they was with, married to, or in a relationship with. And it just inspired me to write this book to get the word out that even though you have been in domestic violence, and most of them ended in divorce, most of
Mm-hmm.
them ended in separation, even though you have been through it, you are overcomer and not a victim. A lot of
Okay.
times when we go through something as traumatic as domestic violence, we still have a victim mindset. And I tell people this all the time, that just because you're out of it doesn't mean that you don't have the representation of a victim. And so
And
you have to have the mindset that
mhm.
you're a survivor.
And
And when
let's just talk about it right there. If you live through it, and I tell people this all the time too. Sometimes we believe just because we live through it, we haven't healed from it, and
yes.
we come out with that victim mentality, and we want to blame everybody else for what's going on.
Yep.
So just a little bit on that. Elaborate just a little bit on that.
Well, that's personally my story. I went through it in many situations. I went through it first as a kid. A lot of people don't know that, and I didn't realize it until I was an adult. Then I went through it in many relationships, and the main relationship I went through it with was my son's father. Now, I didn't realize certain things at the time that I was going through it in other relationships, but until I got out of the main one that was very violent, very traumatic to me. And I end up have to heal after that. Now I didn't want to. Healing, going through a domestic violence shelter, trying to get the counseling that I had to get, also changing my mindset that even though he did the trauma to me, that it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't my fault. And I had to look at him in a different way because I had to forgive him first before I can even heal. And a lot of
Okay.
people don't want to hear that when it comes down to something as severe as domestic violence. That doesn't mean that we have to be back in a relationship together. Of course, we had a child. That was my number one key. That was my number
Mm-hmm.
one reason why I knew I had to forgive, because I didn't want to put what I went through on my child. At the time that it happened, my child was 3 weeks. So I was going through a domestic violence situation, but the time that I got ready to leave, he was 3 weeks old.
Okay.
And I was getting abused. We was together for a year and a half, and I was getting abused all the way up until that time. But when it got to a point where I woke up, like I told people before, God really spoke to me in a dream, woke me up and asked me, is this where you want to live your life? And I literally have a vivid dream that I was going to get killed. And that day I woke up and was like, I'm leaving. I did not know where I was going to go. I did not have a car. I was actually living with him. So that meant I was homeless. But I said I was leaving. And that day, when I said I was leaving, that's where it got worse. And 9 times out of 10, that's usually where victims get abused or some don't survive. So when I
Okay.
went through the process of going through the process of the shelter, had to go call the police. He went to jail, going through the process of being in the shelter, being safe. it was still a mindset change I had to go through because it was a new environment. It was something that I never knew of. I was in there with women that was married, and this was just my boyfriend. And it was just like an aha moment for me too, because some of the women in there was going back to their spouses, and we was getting told that our roommates wasn't coming back because they either got killed or they just wasn't coming back because they
Wow.
went back to their spouses. So at a young age, I was only 24 at that time, going on 25. And at a young age, experiencing all that, it was like a whirlwind for me. But I knew that's not where I wanted to be. I knew that I had a son at that time to raise, even though it was his father. And I knew that that's not where I wanted to be. So from there, after I got into the domestic violence shelter, I went from a transitional training, meaning they put me in a shelter, but they put me in a transitional home where I had to start again on my own, live on my own. And it was very secluded. It was very private. It was just me and my son to start my life again. And I loved the program I was part of because I never seen something like that happen. It wasn't like they was putting you out to the birds and say, okay, you got to get kicked to the curb. But they wanted to let you know that even with the counseling that they was bringing in, they was bringing in people to help us through the trauma. They're bringing in survivors. They're bringing in different people to talk to us that we can overcome this. And those people, even at that time, my counselor that was in the shelter with me, her name was Katha. It was like me watching her, seeing her, and she was pregnant at the time, and it was just like a Black woman I'm looking at like I want to be her. I just had that in my mind because it just seemed like she had a light on her that even though she was talking to me, I seen myself being her. She never been through domestic violence, but she was there to help me. And I seen myself years down the line wanting to be in her shoes, meaning not technically, but help people. And that was another inspiration of mine. But like I said, my first step was forgiveness. I had to really have a conversation with God. And I had a relationship with God, but it wasn't a good one where I felt like God allowed this to happen and he betrayed me. But then I had to understand that God was right there with me and that dream was my protection. It wasn't that he betrayed me. He was letting me know and that he's always there. And so it made my relationship with God grow closer that I was like, okay, I have to forgive. And like I said earlier, a lot of people don't want to hear the forgiveness word because that's hard in a situation of domestic violence. They like, okay, they did that to me. But what I want to tell people is forgiveness is for you, not the other person.
Yes.
It allows you,
Yes.
like I said in my book, to take your power back. Meaning I could forgive my son's father and not have the bitterness, the anger, things that sit up in you that causes cancer and other negative things. And I wouldn't, if I did not forgive him, I wouldn't be sitting right here right now.
Yes.
If I did not forgive him, I wouldn't be talking to people right now because at the same point, it shows the person that you are when you don't forgive people and you hold a lot of bitterness and rage. It ends up showing regardless if you know it or not. It shows in conversation. It shows in who you are as a person. So in that process, like I said, continuing with that process, I went into the transitional home, and the transitional home taught me a lot of things about myself. That I had to be financially independent. I had to just be about me and my son and start my life over. And so that's when I end up being, in that process and getting out of that. Well, years later down the line, I get in a relationship with my husband, and I was still in victim mindset. Okay. Nobody's going to do this to me again. So instead of me being in the, okay, I overcame that, I was still in victim mindset. So it came to where I start verbally abusing my husband, and things happened between us because that was trauma and traumatic because arguing and me trying to hold on to things. It didn't get to my third, like I wrote in the book, third separation, that I had to realize you have to let things go. You're not that victim anymore. And so instead of you trying to say that's not going to happen to me again, how about you just be the woman and evolve to be the woman that God has you to be?
Okay. I want you to hold that thought right there. We are going to take a break just for a minute or so, and we're going to be right back, and we'll pick up right there with you.
If you see me happy, just leave me alone. I deserve this.
Anytime that you go through physical, emotional, and mental abuse, you get to a point where you may have a broken mindset. Meaning, what happened to you in your past, things that happened to you as a child, or things that happened to you when you were a teenager, or even as an adult, may come up through your relationships. Most times, 9 times out of 10, that's where it starts. It started with a broken mindset.
All right, and we're back. We're back, and we just want you to pick up where you left off at, because you're telling such an inspiring story. I know you're helping some people today.
I hope so. So pretty much where we left off, I was just basically saying that the start of the transition started for me when I got into the relationship with my husband, and I had to realize things about myself, that I was still living in the victim mindset. I was still saying that this would not happen to me. So instead of me just accepting the love and what he was giving me, I was kind of like pushing him away and making him turn into a person that he wasn't, because of what I was doing personally, verbally to him. And after the third separation of me and my husband being separated, God literally spoke to me and said, you either going to lose the relationship you have, and it's just not about him. You're going to lose people around you because you're still living in the victim mindset. You got to change, you know? And it was just like, I was just being ugly, not knowing that I was being ugly. And there's so many times that we put on this facade that, I didn't know who I was when I was in a relationship with my son's father. I was insecure. I was, and everybody see, this beautiful, pretty woman. And it's just like, I had a lot of things that people didn't even know about that I was insecure about. I've been homeless twice. So it's just like, my story goes back further, but it's also, I had to realize that's not who I am. That's how, whatever my circumstances was, God had to help me to be an overcomer and say, that's not who you are. Look into who I want you to be. And part of the reason why I wrote Mr. and Mrs. Brokenness is because in my church, I have he's kind of a coach, but a mentor too. And he was talking to me and my husband one time at our house, and he said, the people that you are right now, you are not going to be. If you knew that Mr. and Mrs. Brokenness is in you right now, and Reba and Thomas is sitting on the other side of the room looking at you guys saying, I'm waiting for you to be who God wants you to be. I'll walk, it's like somebody else is in your body, if you want to say that. But we have to see ourselves as broken before and see that we can heal and stop getting out of Mr. and Mrs. Brokenness, that mindset, and heal from who we are and who God has us to be. My number one thing for writing the book, and also to try to start the coaching program that I have, is because a lot of times when you go through stuff, like I stated earlier, things happen to you where you're still living in that trauma. And instead of living in that trauma, you can help other people by being an overcomer and saying, okay, even though I went through that, let me help somebody else. So this was my main reason too about writing a book, because I want to help as many people. It happens to women and men. So we're just not going to put domestic violence on women, because I know personally that actually is going through it too. And that's hard to say, but it's the truth. So I just didn't write my book for women. I know it's more women that are buying and geared towards it, but it's for men too. And it's a scope of healing that you are not who you were. You're not that person. You're not that victim. You're an overcomer. Use your story, whatever it is, whether it is mental abuse, physical abuse, spiritual abuse, financial abuse. Use your story, emotional abuse, to help someone else.
Well, we are glad that you came in today and shared your story with us. And I know you inspired some people today. And I know you are going to keep on inspiring people. And I'm a male, so I am glad that you did recognize that there are men that's in the same predicament, in the same experiencing the same thing. So I applaud you for that. Because sometimes, and it's even, I won't say even harder, because sometimes as men, we are too ashamed to even admit it.
Admit it, yes.
Yes. So I'm glad that you spoke on that and you wrote it for both men and women. As I said, thank you, Reba, for coming in and sharing your story with us. I want everybody that's watching us, go out and buy her book. Get these words of inspiration, especially if you're in it, if you are experiencing it, or if you know somebody that's experiencing it. Go out and purchase her book. I know her words will inspire you to get some help. Thank you, Reba.
Thank you.
And now we're getting ready to take another break. When we come back, our subject matter guest, Courtney Lloyd, will be up.
And you better come back over here so I can get some sleep now.
Go straight to hell.
Man, where you going? Come on now, get in the car now. Talking about tax. Look, you ain't going shopping. You want to go shopping? I had a man take you shopping. Woman, I tell you, get your ass in this car. I ain't playing with you, man.
Hey, call me when you're ready to go to sound check.
Yeah, don't worry about it now. Make sure everybody be there when it's supposed to be.
All right.
What's wrong with you? Talking to me like that? Huh? What'd you say?
Don't start with me. I ain't in the mood today, all right?
Oh, you ain't in the mood? Don't you ever talk to me like that again. You hear me? Huh? You hear me?
Welcome back to Aces Matter Live. And we just want to thank Reba Bell once again for her inspiring words. And now we are going to bring up our subject matter guest, Courtney Lloyd. And she's a licensed mental health specialist. She's based out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She specializes in substance abuse. She's a strong advocate for supporting a Black Women Initiative. So thank you, Courtney, for being with us today. We just want to say that everybody go along with this is our first episode. We're having some technical difficulty, but you know what? We're going to keep right along. Here she comes. There she is. I knew she was coming.
Hey, good to see you.
How you doing today, Courtney?
Good. I'm well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to have you. I'm glad to have you. I know you're going to put some topping on what we just heard. Give us some give us some of your expert opinions on what we just heard.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so you about summed it up. I'm licensed in addiction counseling, and I'm also certified in clinical trauma and rehabilitation counseling. I am here in Baton Rouge, a little bit on the outskirts of Baton Rouge.
Okay.
I have an opportunity to teach some undergrad students psychology here at a HBCU, And then I'm also a student myself, so I'm pursuing my doctorate degree with an emphasis in ACs, looking at ACs in our Black students who are, in college, and how that actually impacts their academic performance. So that about sums it up. But I'm glad to be here.
Well, you're doing some big things out there. We got some questions, and one of the first things I want to ask you, Courtney, is how common is the story that you just heard?
Oh, unfortunately, it's very common. Like Reba talked about, being 24 years old, that's typically, the age where we see it. 18 to about 34. It's really the age range is where we typically see more domestic violence and things of that nature. So her story is very, very common. Like she said, it's really hard because you don't want to walk through that journey. There's so much shame that goes along with that, mindset shifts that have to happen. The resources, depending on where you live, are very limited. So her story is very, very common, unfortunately, but it's so important because we need to get it out there, and we need to let other women and men know that they're not alone. And I think that's what's so interesting about domestic violence is that it feels like you're in it by yourself, and that nobody else understands it, nobody else has experienced it, and so it makes it hard, to really get the help you need. So it's a very common story.
And one of the things that I've seen, and first thing they do is try to separate you from everybody else.
Absolutely. Yeah. The separation, the divide, especially from people who are, if they sense that people are getting a little bit too close to you, you're kind of starting to give people insight about what's happening. They definitely have that control factor where they have to be in control of every single thing. And so most abusers cannot stand it whenever you start to build relationships with other people. So that's very true.
Okay. So tell us, we like to keep this around. We talk about ACEs, so we like to keep it surrounded around children from 1 to 18. So how does it affect the children that's in the home?
It has such a long-lasting impact, especially in our children who don't have the language for that. Sometimes they don't really understand and really can't give it the language. They don't have the emotions, to really express it. So it really does impact them. Also in our school-age children, so we will typically see it there as well with the ADHD. And that's typically from them having experienced so much stimulation, being in environments where it's extremely chaotic all the time. And so their brains are now reprogrammed to expect things to happen, at any time. And so when they go to school, it's really hard for them to concentrate, really hard for them to focus. And so then we start to see the ADHD diagnoses and things of that nature. So it's really, it's a ACE that really does have long lasting impact if we don't, get ahead of it. If we don't give kids the ability to, to talk about it in language that they understand. So they're not going to understand domestic violence. They're not going to understand intimate partner violence, but they will understand hitting. They will understand hurting, kicking, things of that nature. And so just giving them the space to talk about it in a way that they understand it.
Now, would they be more likely to become bullies themselves in school or being aggressive and anger?
We do see it a lot. It is very, very common for them to then begin to perpetuate that, to be perpetrators of that. It's really high statistically where kids who experience that or who are witnesses of it, who will actually grow up and then do that same thing in their marriages and relationships, even though they'll say they don't want to. Right. Even when we listen to Reba talk about her being married now and how she was starting to, show some of those things in her marriage, it just really does follow. And it really does start, with kids who are at school because they start to kind of, reenact what they're seeing in their home environments.
Okay. So we talked about the long-term effects of the children. What about the one that's being abused?
Same thing, just going, right? You have the physical components of it. So you have irritable bowel syndrome, the mental, psychological parts, so they can develop depression, heart disease, diabetes. It's just so many different things where our bodies are just constantly in survival mode It was constantly trying to figure out and trying to normalize, and we start to take that stuff on physically. So I know that I think Nadine Burke did a really good TED talk where she was talking about seeing ACs in the, in the physical health settings, and it really wasn't so much, diet. Yeah, that's a part of it, but it's starting to come up and starting to occur in our neighborhoods and our environment. So lots of impact.
That toxic stress, when it stay in survival mode, that toxic stress is what really, impacts the, as I said earlier, the development of the brain and the body.
Yes, absolutely.
So what are some of the resources that are available?
So I know that a little while ago, I think we had one up, and that's the one that I actually wrote down, that one, National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. Also, obviously, 911 is going to be your go-to if you're in an active situation where you're, at risk for losing your life. Always that. And then for people who are looking more locally, I would also encourage just to do a Google search for local areas. If you need, like she said, domestic violence shelters and things of that nature. What's interesting is that some of them do have like a little button. So if, let's say, for example, if I'm Googling and my abuser is coming into the room, I can quickly get out of that website so they don't see that I'm, looking for resources. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. We're going to definitely put that number back up, keep that number up for in case somebody's watching that needs that number. You have given us a lot, and we thank you for your expertise. And right now we are going to get ready to take another break. Thank you again, Courtney.
Thank you.
See, don't play with this. Relax. Come on, have I not want you? Have I not want you? Come on out of here. Get out of place. Have I not told you? She's crying. Can't you see? This is the last time I have to tell you about this. You see what I'm doing? Last time I'm worried about. Get my phone ready. You see what I'm doing when I come back from work today.
Welcome back. Welcome back. And since this portion, since I'm a preacher, I've been in the ministry now for 22 years, I always like to take this ACEs and whatever we're going through back to the scriptures, because I believe whatever we're going through in life, there's something in the scriptures that can help us through it, that can encourage us through it. And as I was doing my studying, I came up on Ephesians chapter 5, and it started around verse 21 there. It first said for the woman to be submissive to her husband. I think a lot of men in a relationship, I may get slack from this, but I think a lot of men in a relationship take that too literal. Submission as volunteer, because what got the writer was there, he was making an example. The marriage between the man and the woman is an example of Christ and the church. So Christ never makes us follow him. Christ never tells us that we have to do this and we have to do. He gives us a choice. We are free moral agents. So and that means that for her to come submissive under her husband, that as a volunteer action, she's not to be made or forced to be submissive to him. And then as it went on, it said that he is the head of the marriage. And we have to remember that head mostly means that the head means that we are the provider and we are to take care. It's not mean as head as being in control and the power over everything. So it's telling us that our wives are supposed to be submissive to us only because God has created a head. She comes under cover, we cover her. She's supposed to be submissive to her. She's supposed to be submissive to us because we as men were first submissive to God. And so that's the order. Christ is covered by God. The man is covered by Christ. And the wife is covered by the man. So that scripture sometimes is taken out of context. It's never meant to say that that man is a head of his home with power and domestic violence. It's because she submits to him, because she loves him, and he is providing for her. He's covering her in prayer, and he's taking care of her. That's what that scripture means. And sometimes we take it too literal. It does not mean that she comes under us because of fear. And as we get ready now, if I stay on the scripture, I'll be going too far. So I'm going to cut off now. In the next segment, we are getting ready to take another break, and we will be back.
So have you heard about these things called ACEs?
I mean, I think I heard of them, something about adverse childhood experiences. Why you ask me that?
Yeah, that is what ACEs stands for. And I was reading this research from the CDC. And like you said, adverse childhood experiences, you basically take these 10 questions and it's going to give you a score, 0 through 10. What was fascinating about this research was they said if you score a 5 or more, they be saying you're a risk to society.
So what you're saying is both me and my sons are a risk to society? They build prisons in preparation for people with these untreated ACEs, don't they?
Yeah, basically. Unless, of course, they go untreated and you catch them early. But that ain't it. You know what else the CDC said?
What?
The CDC said that diabetes, obesity, cancer, heart disease, and stroke are all associated with these things called adverse childhood experiences, aka ACEs.
Stop. So what you're saying is, if the streets don't kill me, the diseases resulting from these ACEs will. The diseases resulting from these ACEs will. What about alcoholism? I got a couple of people that's been messed up on alcoholism in my family. A couple of them done died.
That's in there too, but I'm just talking about the top 5. We ain't even got to the tip of the iceberg. Check this out. You know what else they said?
What?
They said 1 in every 6 people have at least a score of 4 or higher.
1 in every 6 people have at least a score of 4 or higher.
So what you're saying is, at least one person on this call right now should have been incarcerated or at risk for early death because of these untreated ACEs?
Basically.
There's a zip code near you that could use some healing, and we think you've got what it takes to become a zip code hero. Join the ACEs Matter Zip Code Hero campaign and use your gifts to help raise a family out of poverty, mental illness, and even despair. ACEs Matter wants to end multi-generational cycles of childhood trauma, and we need people like you who are willing to take one for the team. What's in it for you? Glad you asked. First of all, you'd help create a healthier humanity, and who wouldn't want their name associated with that? Secondary benefits include the joy of helping a family that wouldn't otherwise have access to you. And we can't forget to mention that we would have cross promotions for your product or service, brand endorsement, viral customer testimonies, and special acknowledgments on all the ACEs Matter social platforms. Yesterday, a family could have used your gifts. Today, we can make the call. Let's be real. We need to heal. Apply today to become a zip code hero, and let's heal humanity together, one zip code at a time. Visit us at acesmatter.org to learn more.
Welcome back. And in this segment, we are going to bring everybody back in the room. and we're just going to have a good conversation. Hello, Reba and Courtney.
Hi.
Hello.
We're going to have a good conversation with all three of us this time. And one of the questions I want to put out there so we can discuss is, so Reba, how did you get out of the situation that you were in?
How did I get out of my first abusive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, abusive situation.
Like I stated earlier, I woke up that morning, had the dream, and I ended up telling my son's father that I was leaving, and that's when my abuse encountered more. To the point of fact that I got punched, kicked, thrown down the stairs, choked, everything that you can name. By the time I ran to the phone to get the phone because he knew I was trying to call the police at that time. He ended up grabbing the phone and throwing it. I hurry up, put it together because back in the day you used to have the phone where you had the battery pack on the back, and so if you dropped it, it fell in pieces. So it ended up falling in pieces, and I ended up running up the stairs to try to get my phone, and I ended up thinking about my son. And what clicked to me is when I ended up having my son in my head in a traumatic moment. Now, mind you, this probably was 5 minutes of abuse, but it seemed longer than that. And mind you, I'm thinking in my head, if I grab my son, he'll stop doing this to me. So I end up grabbing my son, put my son in my arms, and I'm crying. And I was like, stop. And he ended up, all I thought about was shaking baby syndrome at that time. And he ended up shaking me. And so I had my child in my hands, and I was like, and something in me just rose up as a mother, and I pushed him and then when I pushed him, it was like he fell back, and it was just like his eyes got bucked, and he just walked away. Well, about time I called the police, I ended up running, getting back the phone, calling the police, putting the phone back together. They got there. I was so shaken up. They ran up the stairs, busted the door, ran up the stairs. And I didn't even know that, like, my whole side of my face, one side was blue and black. You couldn't even see my face or whatever. And I just looked in the mirror, and I heard one officer tell the other officer, get the camera. She's beaten up pretty bad. And I turned and looked in the mirror because I'm still holding my baby. And it was just like this whole side was swollen. So how I ended up getting out of it, I ended up just, like I said, that day made the decision that I was leaving. Not understanding or knowing at that time that heightens your abuse if you already going through abuse. But all I did know is I needed to be out of it because of the dream that I got, that the dream I actually had, to tell people the truth. I had a dream that I was laying in the bed because he did it the night before, and I was laying in the bed and I woke up and he stood over me with a gun, and I knew he had a gun, and he shot me. That's the dream that I had. And so it woke me up at 5 a.m. and like a panic. And it was kind of like me at that time saying that was my warning to get out after all that I've been through. And that's how I end up getting out.
Courtney, you have anything? How many cases do you see where they don't get out? There's, you was blessed to be able to get out, but I know it's probably more cases where they don't get out.
Yeah, that's so commendable. I'm thinking about when she was sharing her story. It's so true that whenever women decide to leave, that's when the violence heightens. And so I'm thinking about a young lady now that I worked with for some time who was in that same place, decided to leave, and she was stabbed, and by the grace of God, she survived that. But, there are so many people who do stay, like you said, for the children. We don't want the kids to see us broken up. I want my child to have his dad. I want to be in the 2-parent household, but then you have to think about the risk, right? So is it more beneficial to have them stay and see this, but, it's a hard decision. I don't want to make it sound like it's something simple, but because I had to pray my way out of it, literally. It was just the grace of God that really, he moved. That's how I was able to get out. And I prayed for 2 years. And so it was just literally the move of God. But at the same time, I was a teen. So I didn't have the where we were living together, so to speak. So I didn't have that component, but I didn't tell anybody. You know, I kept signing up for it, for the relationship. So it was just by the grace of God that he decided to move. But I know that's not typical, and I want to say that too. So there's just so many different examples, so many different stories. But the important thing is that we're talking about it and hopefully normalizing the conversation so that people don't think that it's just them, right? It's a lot of us out here.
And I like that you said that, because that's exactly what I felt at that time. Just like you, I didn't tell anybody. My family didn't find out I was getting abused until literally that day I was going to the hospital and he went to jail.
Yeah.
That he was getting abused all the time. Now, you know, it gets to the point where, like you said, people stay. I think I stayed because I thought it was in love, and I wasn't. It wasn't even about my child. Actually, my child is the one the reason why I left. Like I told people earlier, he was 3 weeks. So it was like, I don't think I want my child seeing this, getting slapped just because, you know. So my child and God was the reason why I left. But like I said too, I've always tell people this, that the reason why I want to talk about domestic violence, because it's so silenced. It is so silenced in the church. It is so silenced everywhere that we talk about it. Like everybody want to act like it's not happening.
Right.
And that's the problem that we have now today, that domestic violence is happening right in front of our faces. That whether it's physical, mental, or emotional, let's keep it real, it's just not physical. That it is a factor, and it happens more than we think. And it's a statistic that just 6 people in the room, like 5 of those 6 people are getting abused or something like that. So
it's so interesting too, because a lot of times, I know for me, I wanted the abuse to stop, right? But I didn't want to tell anybody. I wanted to protect him, but then I also wanted to get out. And it's like this paradox of like, what are you doing here? You know, you want to be out, but then you don't want anybody to intervene. But then I'm also upset because nobody's intervening. And so it's just so it's so much. But it's heavy, and you're right. It does happen everywhere. We have women who are in our churches, in our congregations, who are married women who are walking through it, but nobody's going to talk about it. This is why this is so important.
So one of the how now, Reba, tell us how you thriving now after that.
Thriving?
Yes.
I keep a relationship with God. But that's my number one thing. But I know everybody doesn't have a relationship with God. But I would say therapy. Right now, I am in therapy. I was in therapy at that time, but I'm in therapy for different reasons now. For things, I'm in therapy personally now because of things that happened to me in my childhood, ACEs. That I'm realizing now has nothing to do with domestic violence, but my thrive is therapy. Therapy helps you communicate in a way where you feel like you're not getting judged, but somebody is actually helping you see yourself, and also helping you to see that you can come out of this. And by talking about things, it's like a release. You know, therapy is a release where you it's a verbal communication. You know, like meditation, but meditation is not verbal, but it's like I can't explain it, but it's such a release, and it helps me a lot. So I always tell people I recommend therapy because I want to be a coach, and I am a coach. I'm not a therapist. So if I see I have to dig deeper, then I, send you somewhere else where I specialize in is trying to coach you through trying to live past that. If I feel like you need therapy, then I recommend that. And it's also in my book too.
Okay. Courtney, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, like she said, therapy, for me, I didn't have therapy because I was a teen. I didn't know anything about counseling or therapy. I don't even know that there were counselors or therapists in the town I lived in at the time. The closest thing was the guidance counselor, and all I knew she talked about was, academics and going to college. And so for me, I literally had to just kind of, like I said, pray my way out of it and just allow God to do the work, because that wasn't a resource or an avenue for me at that time.
Yeah.
So like she said, if you have access to it, and it's so much more now, right? You have telehealth, people who are all over the world who can help. But, counselors, coaches, if you're in a place where you can do coaching and you've done the deep level work, mentorship relationships are also great.
Yeah.
If it's a safe space, somebody who has done their own work and then can kind of walk you through it as well. So, yeah.
I want to say this, since we are targeting our race, African American, Black race. As a preacher, I've seen many and have had many women to talk to me, but that's how they want to do. Yeah, as our race, we want. Our thing is take it to the preacher, pray over it, take it to the altar. What's in your house? What's in our house? Stay in our house. And we don't understand how that's hurting our race.
Exactly.
And I think we need more like the two of you that's out talking about domestic violence to help, especially it's both men and women. But if we as a race would see more of us talking about it.
I agree.
That's so very true. I mean, we do take it to the church, and what happens in our house stays in our house. Nobody needs to know our business. We've adopted all of this language. And it's the reason why we're still hurting.
That's
right. And the people that taught us that, they're still hurting. And so it just keeps going, right?
That's right.
It just takes one person to shift the narrative. I'm always heavily telling my children, like, no, listen, it's okay to cry. No, my son as well. No, go cry. If you need to do that, it's okay to do that. I want them to have language. I want them to feel that it's okay to process, to go through. And so like I said, I was tickled when you said we do take it to the church and we do take it to the altar, but there's a work, that's good stuff, but there's a work that has to happen after that, right? Triggers we're still being triggered, right?
That's right.
20 years, we're still triggered at times. So you got to know what to do with that. And you got to know what to do with that, just taking it to the altar.
I think taking it to the altar and praying about it, that is a strength, give you strength, but then we need a strategy.
Right.
Through it.
Yeah, that's so true.
All right. I would just want to thank, great job, everybody. We want to thank Reba for being with us and Courtney for being with us today. Yeah. Both of y'all have inspired. I know you inspired me. You inspired all the listeners. I know you have. And I just want to say thank you and keep doing the great work that you're doing, both of you. And we're going to, now it's time to wrap it up, this show up. All good things must come to an end. And so, so I just want to thank everybody that's has watched us, that's listening to us, watching us now. Thank you for coming on our first episode. Our first episode, we had some technical difficulties, but I promise you it's going to get better. And we're going to say some good things and things that you need to hear. So come back and be with us again. And if you need any help, women or men, please call this hotline number. It's been up. We've been flashing it the whole time. There it is. Take it down. Courtney gave us some good things that we can do. I didn't even know about the computer, what you can do online and hit a button, you can take it all down. I didn't know that. That was real good. So if you don't remember one thing from this episode, if you are being abused, please take down this number and get some help. Thank you, everybody, for joining in today. And we will.
If you have a birthday coming up, or maybe you'd just like to do something for the greater good, please consider starting a personal fundraiser on Facebook and selecting ACEs Matter as your cause. Need a reason? Well, we have 3 just for you. ACEs Matter helps families in need cover the cost of mental health services. ACEs Matter hires local contractors and even stay-at-home parents who need flexible work schedules. We care about humanity, and ACEs Matter provides free training and education to those who've been affected by childhood trauma. It's easy to set up a donation campaign from your Facebook account. From your phone or internet browser, type or search www.facebook.com/fundraisers. Select nonprofit, search for ACEs Matter, type in how much money you'd like to raise, choose an end date, give your fundraiser a catchy title, edit the default description if you'd like, then click Create. Congratulations. Now you can invite your friends, share on your timeline, and raise money for a great cause. For every ACE story told, an ACE can be prevented. 2 heartbeats from our house to yours.
ACEs Matter is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. EIN 85-124-6674.
Mentally abusing them, physically abusing them, sexually abusing them. Adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences. Mentally abusing them, physically abusing them, sexually abusing them.
Adverse childhood experiences. We got the unpredictable stresses that children go through, like losing mommy or daddy, or watching them go to jail, forced to grow up because they've been touched down there. They even see parents depressed with no time to spare. This is why the kids are lonely, traumatized.